Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck tech for you from the new Jumpstart 2022. We have probably the most exciting Commander, Kibo Uktabi Prince. And if you don't know what Kibo does, he can basically tap to make a banana token for each player. And a banana token is basically a treasure that's going to add only green or red and is going to gain you 2 life when you sacrifice it. But that's not all Kibo does. He also has a tribal component, since every time an opponent's artifact is put into the graveyard from play, all of your monkeys and apes are going to get a +1/+1 counter. Even further, he has another ability, which is that when he attacks, the defending player is going to have to sacrifice an artifact. So basically, no matter what's happening, artifacts are going to be hitting the graveyard. Don't really ask me why a banana is an artifact, I can't really explain that. But in any case, this commander offers a few very cool build around options. We're going to try to combine all of them a little bit here, so we're going to be doing a little bit of monkey and ape tribal. We're going to be doing a lot of artifact destruction, and basically we're going to put a few +1/+1 counter things in there too, just to round it out. So without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off with Beast Whisperer. This is just a very good staple in any green deck. We need to draw cards here, so this is one of our options. Next up we have Bloodline Pretender. Bloodline Pretender is essentially an ape or a monkey in this deck, which is also going to grow every time we play an ape or monkey. So great. Chameleon Colossus is another ape or monkey. Now don't worry, I promise we don't only have changelings in this deck. And it can grow fairly big once it has counters on it, and it can double its power for 4 mana. That's actually really strong. The protection from black is actually also relevant as well, since a lot of removal is black based. So I quite like this in Commander. Viridian Marauder is going to be an absolute house in this deck. Every time we sacrifice one of our own bananas, we're going to gain 5 life. And then of course, if our opponents ever sacrifice any of their bananas, we're also going to get 5 life. We also have a lot of ways to deal with opposing artifacts, so they're all going to be gaining us life every time. It's pretty good. Ferocious Tigerilla is pretty vanilla, but coming in with Trample is kind of relevant, since your monkeys and apes can grow really big in this deck. It's also a cat ape, which is really cool. Glister Sunseeker is going to do a lot of work here by being a repeatable way to deal with artifacts. We can destroy an artifact each turn cycle, which is going to grow our apes, which is very nice. Goblin and Archomancer is going to reduce the cost of most of our deck, which is really good. Gorilla Shaman is one of the best cards in the deck because it intersects at exactly what we want. It's repeatable artifact removal, although a little bit expensive, and it's also an ape, so it's going to grow with the rest of your team. Grun the Lonely King is a pretty cool one. I mean, we're very rarely going to be attacking alone, but it can be relevant sometimes in certain situations. Maybe the rest of our board is kind of small. We can just smash him with this, and it can hit for a lot of damage. Hooting Mandrills is a pretty good ape that can come down for very cheap late game, so that's a nice option to have. It also has Trample, which is very relevant in this deck. Jolene the Plunder Queen is really cool, and not only because she's named after a Dolly Parton song. We're going to be getting some treasures with this when we attack, and when we do, we're going to be getting an extra one, and that obviously feeds into synergy with stuff like Fangren Marauder and some other cards. But then the treasures that we're giving our opponents are also going to grow our ape team if they sacrifice them. So it's kind of like all upside for us, and it still encourages our opponents to attack each other somewhat, so I quite like this in the deck. Kogla the Titan Ape is again another one that intersects very well with the deck. It's an ape, which is really relevant, and it fights, which is always good, and then when it attacks, it's going to destroy an artifact or enchantment, which is something that we want in this deck, obviously. So this is a card that is just fantastic in any deck, but in this deck in particular, it's an all-star. Manglehorn is really good because it's going to mean that the bananas that our opponents get are actually going to be tapped the turn they come in, which somewhat minimizes the fact that we're giving them free mana. Masked Vandal is an ape that's going to deal with an artifact or enchantment. It is a little bit awkward that it doesn't destroy it and it exiles it, but it's still probably good enough to make the deck. Nylea, God of the Hunt, is going to be really good here by giving all of our big apes and gorillas trample. Ravenous Baboons I really like because it's a decent ape that's going to destroy non-basic land when it comes into play. Having some land hate is important in most decks, and this fits our deck very well. Realm Walker is a little bit awkward in this deck because we're going to have to choose apes or monkeys, but we're pretty much always choosing apes because that's the vast majority of these creature types, and it can still be pretty good. It's still going to allow us to get some card advantage now and then, so it's a good card to have in the deck nonetheless. Sarinth Steel Shaper is really interesting in this deck. Since we're going to be having an artifact enter the battlefield on every one of our turns, guaranteed, that means that this is actually going to filter through quite a bit of our deck, and if we have Jolene out, we can actually get extra artifacts with the treasures, so this can be very good in filtering through our deck. Scrounging Bandar works really well in this deck by being sort of a forgotten ancient that can kind of move counters during the upkeep, so those counters can be put onto anything else for good effect. Speedborn Muse is kind of important in the deck by allowing Kibo to use his ability multiple times per turn cycle. It also works very well with something like Gleesa's Sunseeker, so we really like it in this deck. Silverback Elder is amazing, obviously, in any commander deck, but in this one that is based around Apes, it's even better. It even has an ability to destroy artifacts or enchantments when a creature ETBs, so it's just all gravy with this. Silverback Shaman is really good since when it dies, it's going to replace itself. Simian Simulacrum is pretty solid because it comes down early and starts making one of you guys bigger, and then it's going to grow every time an artifact is put into the graveyard from our opponents, so that's pretty good. And then we can even unearth it later on for one final hit, so very solid card. Simian Sling is a pretty fun one. It's just a monkey basically, but it can occasionally be useful to give a creature +1/+1 and put it onto something. For the most part, we're just going to keep it as a 1-drop though. Simian Spirit Guide is either a 1-turn burst of mana or another ape that will keep growing with its team. Summit Apes can be pretty difficult to deal with once it gets really big because it effectively has Menace. Teething Wormlet I really like. It's going to keep growing and gaining us some life, and it's going to get Death Touch as well, so it's pretty solid. And it's also absolutely adorable. Timeless Witness is a nice little bit of recursion. It's going to make sure that we can reuse stuff later in the game. Toski, Bearer's Secrets, is hopefully going to let us draw quite a few cards, and it's going to allow our monkeys and apes to keep snowballing. Uktabi Orangutan has some pretty sketchy art, but it is a very good card in this deck, seeing as it's an ape that deals with an artifact. The Ashino Heretic is a card that I really like, and it's particularly good in this deck since every turn cycle we can deal some damage to an opponent, destroy an artifact, and grow our entire team, basically. Wily Bandar is good as a monkey that's going to get bigger and then can just have Indestructible for 3 mana, which means that it can survive most board wipes and removal. Yavimaya Steel Crusher is a good one that we can sacrifice to destroy an artifact. Obviously, it's a little bit awkward that he dies when that happens, but still, it's a good option to have. And Zodiac Monkey is very old school, but if anybody's playing green, this can be very, very menacing in this deck since it can't be blocked and it might grow very big. Next up, we're moving on to sorceries, and we have Blasphemous Act, which is a classic board wipe that should be in pretty much every red deck. Brotherhood's End is a good new one that's going to deal with small creatures, and hopefully our creatures are big enough that they don't take that much damage from this. It can also, though, crucially, wipe the board of small artifacts, which includes all bananas and tokens. That's probably going to be a huge buff for our team if our opponents are holding back on using their bananas. Cultivate is just good ramp, and so is Kodama's Reach. Harmonize is a good way to draw cards in the deck, just straight up draw 3 cards. We like that quite a bit in this deck. Hull Breach is good because it's going to let us deal with both an enchantment and an artifact. That's obviously very good in this deck. Rampant Growth is ramp. We need that in every green deck. Shamanic Revelation is probably going to draw us a few cards since this is a go wide deck. And it's also probably going to gain us some life since our monkeys are pretty big, so that's pretty awesome. And Vandoblast is obviously very good for dealing with all enemy artifacts on the board. In a board with enough artifacts on it, this can basically be an overrun effect in this deck, which is really good. For instance, we have Ancient Grudge. It's going to deal with 2 artifacts for 1 card. That's really good value in this deck. Artifact Mutation is going to, again, deal with an artifact and provide us a nice little bit of value by giving us a bunch of tokens that we can use to chump block or do all other sorts of things with. And if we have Maskwood Nexus out, this is really, really good because all those tokens are suddenly apes and monkeys, and any other artifact dying from our opponents is going to keep growing those tokens. Beast Within is a good piece of catch-all removal, as is Chaos Warp. Heroic Intervention is pretty necessary in this deck for keeping our guys alive since we're very on-board kind of strategy. Same thing with Inspiring Call, and it's particularly good in this deck because we're going to have so many +1/+1 counters on our creatures that we should be drawing 3 or 4 cards off of this each time. Klaus Will is fantastic if we're against a deck with flyers in it. Otherwise, it's still going to be able to deal with artifacts and enchantments, which is very solid in this deck. And Return of the Wildspeaker is an awesome card, I think, in any non-human based deck. It's either going to draw us a bunch of cards at instant speed, or it's going to give our team an overrun effect at instant speed. Both of those are really fantastic. Moving on, we have artifacts. Idol of Oblivion is probably going to draw us cards quite easily since we're making a lot of tokens in this deck. Liquid Metal Coating and Liquid Metal Talk are really fantastic in this deck. Since we have so many ways to destroy artifacts, this is going to allow us to turn our opponent's best things into artifacts turn after turn and keep destroying them. They're basically must-kill cards in this deck. Our opponents are probably going to have to waste resources on Liquid Metal Coating and Liquid Metal Talk. Maskwood Nexus has a few nice little synergies. We are running a few cards that aren't apes or monkeys, so this is going to help those cards also grow with our team. and it's also going to make tokens that are apes or monkeys by itself. Monkey Cage is an interesting one. We have to make sure that we have enough mana to play another big creature after this. So this is a very late game card, but if we do, it can be very good because suddenly we're going to get a bunch of tokens that are all apes. And Throne of Geth is going to let us sacrifice those artifacts that we might have lying around, including our bananas, to proliferate all those counters on our creatures, so that's really good too. Then we have enchantments, and we have Sin Divines, which is going to deal some damage to our opponents when they cast non-creature spells. That's fine, but we also mostly want it for the second part, which means that when we needed to, we can just destroy an artifact or enchantment and deal 2 damage to our opponents, and hopefully grow our team too. Descent into Avernus is really spicy in this deck. It's going to ensure the game keeps moving forward. The first turn, it's going to deal 2 damage to each player, and everybody's going to get 2 treasure tokens. But after that, it's 4 damage and 4 treasure tokens, etc., etc. Of course, our opponents are not going to be likely to use those treasure tokens, so this makes this card much more one-sided than it normally would be. Hardened Scales is a staple in any deck revolving around counters, and we do have a counter sub-theme in this deck. Invigorating Hot Springs is pretty cool since it includes monkeys in the art, which is awesome. And since our guys are already going to have +1/+1 counters for the most part, this essentially is just going to give our team haste, but then the few creatures that don't come in with +1/+1 counters can get one from this and thus get haste. And Viridian Revel is there to draw us cards whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from our opponent's side of the battlefield. So it's going to work really well with the tokens we're giving them, the treasure tokens and the banana tokens, but also even without those, we have enough ways to kill artifacts that this is going to be a very good card in this deck. And finally, moving on to lands, we have Bala Ged Sanctuary that's going to give us a little bit more recursion for the deck. We have Boseiju, who endures. It's an excellent land, obviously, and it's good to have even more ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments. Kessig Wolfrown should help us push some damage through late game, and we have a lot of mana. Kalni Territory is a nice bit of removal, and our creatures should be bigger than our opponent's ones for the most part. Mosswort Bridge is going to allow us to play something for very cheap, and again, seeing as we're going to have pretty big creatures, this should be trivial to achieve. Skarg the Rage Pits is another way to push through damage, similar to Kessig Wolfrun. Tangled Veil can double up as a bit of ramp if we needed to. And Treetop Village is really good as a manland that's also an ape, which means it's going to grow and the counters are going to stay on it even if it reverts back to being a land, which is very nice. So there you have it. That has been our Kibo Uktabi Prince deck tech. What do you think about this exciting new commander? Are you looking forward to building it? Let us know in the comment section below. I read all comments and respond to all of them. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. We're growing the channel right now and it really helps a lot. And until next time, take care.